The South African government is accused of sexually harassing our children, and a group is now standing forward saying they will have none of it. We are going to be speaking to the representative of Leave Our Kids Alone. Her name is Lauren Aventhia, the creator of the group, which is a movement opposing CSE and sex education in our schools. Now, thousands of parents and teachers have taken to social media as well as other online platforms to express their disapproval of the updated CSE curriculum lesson plans. A Facebook group, a website as well, and WhatsApp groups have been growing at a steady rate. And on Facebook, the group has more than 100,000 members. The Department of Basic Education has officially introduced what the lesson plans will include and is due to be rolled out in the new academic year, as you know, starting in just a few days or hours' time. With us to talk more about Leave Our Kids Alone and the mobilization till this point and how people can become part of the movement, Lauren Aventhia, as I mentioned, creator of Leave Our Kids Alone. Lauren, thank you so much for your time and joining us this evening.
Thank you, Ibrahim, for having me on your show. I'm very honored to be able to speak to your listeners about the problems that our children are facing at school.
Absolutely, and a very important and timely discussion, as I mentioned just a few hours before we enter now into the new academic year 2020, and this is obviously the critical time for the rollout of what has been spoken about for the last few months. We've seen a lot of discussion. There have been some other NGOs, political parties, etc., who've raised the alarm about this, but just give us the story of Leave Our Kids Alone, especially where did this start off and what are your objectives?
Well, it started after I read the press release from an organization called Freedom of Religion South Africa. They put the press release out, I think it was early November or mid-November. And immediately, I felt uncomfortable with what I read, considering that my children are going to grade 5 and grade 4 next year, in grade 2 and grade 1. And I knew just something had to be done. And I, just as a mother, as a mom of 4, decided to create this group on Facebook to see how many people have my sentiments, because I had no idea. And then it just exploded. The growth exploded from the day I started. And it made me realize that the government actually did not consult the people and did not consult parents and also did not consult teachers. Because most people, well, almost everyone that I speak to, does not know that CSE has been in our curriculum all this time, and they do not know that these new SLPs will actually force CSE to be taught to our kids.
And that might bring up a bit of an issue, Lauren. I'm not sure. The fact that, this has been there, people might, the government might say it's been here, so why are people creating a fuss? Just sketch to us what changes. Did you consider it problematic in the first place? And with the, prepared lesson plans, how does this change?
Well, one of the important things to highlight is that I, as a parent, had no idea that sex ed was part of the curriculum or comprehensive sexuality education was part of the curriculum at all. And I thought it was something I'd have to deal with in high school. And I think that's the case for most parents, that they didn't realize that it's part of the junior school education curriculum. Also, when I was in high school, and I've spoken to many people my age with kids now in junior school, and they say that in high school they maybe had a lesson or maybe 2 lessons, but it wasn't part of a compulsory curriculum. So that's an important thing to take note of. And the other thing is CSE, comprehensive sexuality education. I've spoken to a few teachers that have been for the training, and one teacher in particular described to me that these scripted lesson plans, in the past, teachers could pick and choose from the books that they had what to teach and what to emphasize on. With these scripted lesson plans, it's literally a script. So from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, the teacher has to cover everything, and the children will also get a book, and they also have to complete every task in that book. And I've also been told by a teacher who's been for the training that the government is going to send inspectors this year to make sure that teachers do that teachers actually cover everything and don't leave anything out. So rights and freedom and choice are completely removed from the equation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, the scariest part of all of this. Why? There's a question. I'm not necessarily asking you this, but, why is it that the government seems to be so vindictive about this? There's threats being thrown around.
I think I have an answer to that.
Okay.
And it has everything to do with the United Nations rolling out Agenda 2030. So the United Nations has Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030, and that incorporates a whole lot of things. But they're specifically emphasizing this CSE, especially to developing countries and African countries. And I think what it's going to essentially do is break down the family unit. I don't think the United Nations wants freedom of religion. I don't think the United Nations wants people to be able to live according to their religious values. So I see this as a direct attack by the government, but even more so by the UN, to attack the freedom of religion in South Africa.
Absolutely devastating. Let's talk about the mobilization, Lauren, where you've now created Leave Our Kids Alone, and as you mentioned, it just growing from strength to strength. How would you define this movement? Is it just a broad way for people to communicate with each other? Is it a formal organization? How do people become part of it if they share the same objectives?
If you share the same objectives, I really think you are a part of it. This isn't a formalized organization, and many people have requested from me to make it a formalized organization, but I'm not going to do that, because then that's when divide and conquer tactics come into play. And I think it's so much stronger that this remains a people movement, an on-the-ground movement, where it's a group I started. It's a way to unify the nation with regards to wanting CSE removed from the curriculum. And I'll give direction as opposed to with regards to what we're going to be planning, but people are free to act according to their own conscience to stop this. And there'll be specific dates where things will happen. The 13th of February is our first nationwide plan of action, where people will be called to gather in public places almost in every municipality across the country. And it's really to show the government that as a nation, we are standing against comprehensive sexuality education as well as sex education in all its shapes and forms in our schools and in our curriculum. And if the government doesn't listen after that, we will go into further action.
Now, the coalition, if you want to call it that, or the supporters of this movement as it stands, how broad does this, or how broadly does this represent South Africa? Because I mean, again, if one has to look at some of the communication coming out from government, previously they spoke about alarmism, and they tried to, the undertone that I would get is that they try to, corner the people who are speaking this kind of language, to say they're just a small group of ultra-conservatives, or if they are from a particular racial group and or particular understanding of religion. So I'm sure in the number of people who've come forward, you've got a good indication of how broad the support is. How broad is it?
We have an enormous scope of the demographics in South Africa. We have a lot of people from rural towns, a lot of people from townships. We have a lot of people from the cities. We definitely represent all races. We represent a lot of Christians and a lot of Muslims. And we also represent those that aren't religious but that still see a problem with this. We are also representing social workers and child psychologists who have said to me, this is going to do more damage than good, especially when it comes to our most vulnerable children that are already experiencing trauma in the form of sexual abuse. This is going to hit them the worst. And that's something the government is refusing to acknowledge, that there are people in South Africa, forget your overseas experts, there are people in South Africa that are willing to say to the government, these are our studies, these are our findings, this is not going to help. Why doesn't the government speak to the very social workers they employ in the schools and find out what the problems are? So the government's just not listening. They're not listening to us.
Let's take a step back again. As you said, many parents are unaware, and that's why perhaps the movement, or as big as it is, it can be much larger, and that's just because of ignorance about the objectives of this curriculum. What exactly would you put down the main objections that you have to this curriculum being?
Well, it's simple. I can probably speak for hours on the problems with South Africa's education system and also government system. But the only objective of Leave Our Kids Alone is to remove comprehensive sexuality education and sex ed from the school curriculum. That is it. That's what we want gone, plain and simple. We do not want it as part of a compulsory curriculum at all. We don't want it in our schools. And we just want, as parents, the right to say no.
Is that, unequivocal? There's no room. I'm just asking in terms of the stated objectives by the government, and obviously CSC is not necessarily the answer to those objectives, but how do we respond, or how do we offer then an alternative when, the government talks about, sexual violence in our country and violence against women and children, and they see CSC perhaps as answering or being a response to that?
I've spoken about this quite in depth before, and basically, so the government is saying teen pregnancies are on the rise, and so are HIV infections, and CSE is going to stop that. That is utter nonsense. When they talk about teen pregnancies, they're often referring to 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds and 12-year-olds that are falling pregnant, and when you're talking about that, what we're missing, the big elephant in the room here, is that there are pedophiles targeting underage girls and making them pregnant, and taking advantage of the economic circumstances. And the government needs to up their game when it comes to the justice system in catching the perpetrators and making sure they stay in jail and don't roam the streets. And then we have to address aspects in society where it's become almost a accepted thing for young teenagers to be sexually active. And instead of teaching children about sexuality, I've gone through all the SLPs, and I encourage everyone to go through all the scripted lesson plans. They are on the website, leaveourkidsalone.co.za. If you read all of them, the main takeaway that I got from reading them is that it is normalizing a sick, hypersexualized society. So children are going to school, they're learning this. So all of a sudden, your uncle that is a predator, you expect it. You expect the males around you to be predators, when that is not the case. There are still more good and normal people in society than sick criminals. And unfortunately, the government cannot see that. And they are not governing this country, and that is why we are seeing a rise in teen pregnancies. Poverty is still rife. That is why we're seeing a rise in teen pregnancies. Criminals are not being held accountable. That is why we're seeing a rise in teen pregnancies. It's not because children don't know about complex sexual interactions and abuse. It's still a parent's main responsibility to teach their children values and morals and matters pertaining to sexuality. It's not the government's job to teach them, because within the whole of South Africa, there are so many different beliefs, so many different values that people live by, often very similar, which is great, but it's up to the parents and it's up to, civic society to raise. It takes a village to raise a child. It doesn't take a government to raise a child.
So a misdiagnosis, or even a willful misdiagnosis of the problem. Have you liaised or made attempts to liaise with the government directly?
When I first started the group, I did try to contact Elijah. I tried to phone him. I sent an email. I phoned one of the other office numbers, and I could not get through at all. So I gave that up early on. And then as I watched more and more of these interviews, I realized that it's talking to a brick wall. He completely undermines, or the government, the department in general, completely undermines any opposing view that parents have on comprehensive sexuality education. And they've taken the stance and the tactic of completely ignoring our existence. And, that is fine. I think the people will speak for themselves when the time comes. And they've basically drawn the line in the sand, because this country is divided on so many things, but when it comes to the protection of our children, we are united. Doesn't matter where we come from, doesn't matter what differences we've had in the past. This is the thing that will unite this country. and the government needs to be careful.
And the various role players, I mean, just let's look at those besides the education department. Firstly, we have educators, principals, and I'm sure within these schools there's a lot of apprehension and also people trying to push back against the system. Do these educators have a recourse? Have you been liaising with them as well?
I have. I've been speaking to a lot of them privately. There's so many that are so scared for their jobs because they get paid by the Department of Education. So they're afraid to publicly say anything. So they're stuck between their own conscience of not wanting to teach this. They're stuck between wanting to consider the wishes of the parents to not teach this, but then at the same time, their jobs are at stake. And the same goes for principals, because if they do not teach it, and if the principal just flatly refuses to let the teachers teach it, their jobs are at stake and they lose their livelihood. So the teachers and the principals are really caught between two difficult situations. There is no real recourse out there. I mean, they have the unions that are supposed to represent them, but I'm not sure if the unions are equipped to deal with something far larger than a labor issue. What we're looking at here is a complete violation of a constitutional right, which is a bigger issue than I think what the unions are able to actually deal with. So it's a sad situation. There are teachers that are saying that they don't want to teach this, they don't know what to do. There's some teachers that have said to me that they will teach it because they have no choice. They have to feed their families. Some are single mothers that need to provide for their children. So teachers are feeling very disempowered. So I think as parents, we need to actually take this responsibility upon ourselves and fight this all the way. I, for one, will not stop until this is out of our school curriculum. I have 4 children, all in junior school. I did not have a very wholesome childhood myself, and I want to make sure that I give them what I didn't have, which is a wholesome childhood based on a moral foundation that can equip them with everything they need to become successful adults one day. And I want the same for all children.
Now, the alternative that's proposed, Lauren, by the department is kind of saying, obviously in a very heavy-handed way, but saying that you could choose other schools or you could sit it out with your children. Your response to that has been that this is far from practical, and you're not going to accept that.
The majority of parents that I know that send their kids to public schools, my children go to a public school, they can't afford a private school. Private schooling is highly expensive. And especially if you have more than one child, it becomes almost impossible to even consider private schooling. So for most South Africans, for most average South Africans, already with inflation going up, with tax going up, with all the burdens that we have as tax-paying citizens, to still try and fork out private school fees, it's just undoable. It's not even an option. So when Angie or Elijah says you have the freedom to not send your kid to a public school, that is not true, because we do not have the economic freedom to do so. So we have no other choice. Mm-hmm. And when it comes, the other thing she said is that you can sit it out. So if you're a single mother and you're working from 8 o'clock till 6 in the evening, how are you going to sit it out? How many mothers work these days? More mothers than most. Mm. And it's not doable. It's a very cheeky and it's a very arrogant solution, if it's even a solution, because it's just not going to happen. Parents can't take time off work every single day to come sit with their kid during life orientation. And if you have more than one child, you're going to be sitting at school the whole time.
Now, I want to ask you this question, but obviously before this, I put in a disclaimer. I don't think it's the appropriate question to ask you, but just like your thoughts on it, in that, for example, very often when we talk about the alcohol problem in South Africa, people would say, why is there so much focus on, or there's been a successful campaign against smoking, but why not alcohol? It's a kind of whataboutism question. So that's why I say it's not your responsibility. You are fulfilling your responsibility, but I'd just like your thoughts on this, where can the issue of CSE be tackled in isolation, where we just talk about the problem of the curriculum and the values that it tries to impart, but at the same time, we know that there's a mass media in South Africa that has carte blanche when it comes to expressing similar kind of values that is accessible to all. There's the excess of social media, there's the kind of clothes that are being marketed towards children, the billboards that greet people. So I'm not saying it's your responsibility, but don't the two go hand in hand in kind of murking the waters regarding morality in the nation?
I'm actually very glad you brought it up. And you're right, with regard to leave our kids alone, that's definitely not part of the conversation we have, but I will give you my opinion on that. And I think this whole issue should bring up a sense of responsibility to parents to be careful what their children are exposed to. Like my children, my oldest is turning 11 soon, my youngest is 6. They have no tablets, they have no phones. They definitely they have no TV at home. There's certain children's movies I won't let them watch. So I filter what they're exposed to. And all parents have that right to filter what children are exposed to. What the government is doing is taking away that right to filter what our children are exposed to. And that's the main difference. So there's some parents that are very liberal with regards to what their children can watch and experience. And that's a personal choice. But I also do think in order for our nation to grow stronger and for our children to grow up as stable and decent and successful human beings, I think parents do need to just consider what it is that their children are watching, how they're speaking, and what they're exposed to via social media. Children do not have to have a phone. Most parents grew up without all of that technology, and we survived, and it's not necessary. I know it's a nice babysitting tool, which is probably the main reason it's given to kids, but it's not at all necessary. We need to go back to good old-fashioned values, letting kids play outside in the street, letting them play sport and games, because that helps the intellectual development as well. And I'm glad you brought up the clothes in the shops. I experienced that recently when I went shopping for my girls, at the blatant immodesty. So there's definitely a trend in society and in Western culture to, in a way, sexualize our children at a young age, and it's unacceptable. But it stops at us. It stops at us as parents to say, you know what? Despite what's in mainstream society, despite what's popular, I'm not going to let my children be exposed to this. And I'm going to protect my children. It's up to us as parents to remember our duties first and foremost. There's a beautiful quote that I often read as inspiration as a working mom that's busy, that no success in the world is worth failure in home. And I think that's something all of us can take heed to, because we're caught up, we're busy, we're trying to survive economically. But if we're failing at home, then we're failing at life.
That's powerful. I just want to leave our listeners with this one, Lauren. Obviously, after discussing this issue in so much detail, and there's obviously much more that can be added to it, but the gist comes out very strongly. There can be outrage, and very often we are keyboard warriors, the term that's used quite often. People can vent their outrage online. That's excellent, and it's a platform. But if that doesn't translate into building the movement, people going out on the streets, making their voices matter when it matters most, then all of that kind of goes to vain. So just speak to us about your ongoing as well as upcoming activities.
Okay, well, right now I'm just mobilizing people across the country according to their municipalities. We have over 200 municipalities in South Africa, and I thought that was probably the easiest way to organize people according to geographical location. On the 13th of Feb, it should be the State of the Nation address. And that's why we want to make a stand. We want, while our government, while our officials are prancing on the red carpet in their fancy dresses and suits and getting photographed by the paparazzi, we want to be making a stand out in our public spaces. So on the 13th of February, please, I'm asking everyone to put in your leave. It will start in the afternoon. It will be child-friendly, so you can bring your children with. Wear white, bring placards, Actual meeting places will be communicated at a future date, but what we need are millions, if possible, parents across this nation standing up and showing the government that we do not want this, and we're going to stand united at all costs.
And obviously your Facebook pages, websites, all available, as you mentioned, the website where you can find lots more information, leaveourkidsalone.co.za. Lauren, I must thank you abundantly for joining us this evening, speaking with so much verve and passion. And I must say, we take our hats off, full of admiration, especially for you as a parent, pushing this forward, not only on behalf of your kids, but the future of the entire nation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And also, I just want to add one more thing, that from next week, we'll be starting our Wear White campaign again, where every Friday we wear white, just to represent the purity and innocence of our children, and just, again, to show unity among ourselves, that we are saying no to CSE in our schools. And thank you very much for your time and for having me on your show. And thank you to the listeners for listening.
Thanks a million. That's Lauren Avanthia, the creator of Leave Our Kids Alone. That's a hashtag, one word. Also the website, leaveourkidsalone.co.za. It's a movement opposing CSE and sex education in our schools.